course, there will be the usual question and answer session. So, Chris, are you ready?
Thank you very much. It's good to see this much interest in the Erie band, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation tonight. Last night, the band completed and finished its 108th consecutive summer of entertaining Huntington County and the area. And we did agree that after you get past 100, the number doesn't really matter anymore. But we did count. It's 108 summers in a row. That includes the COVID summer. We actually played on that summer, barely, but we did play on that summer, so that's been consecutive. A lot of people call us mistakenly call us the oldest or most oldest with continuous playing, oldest band in Indiana. That's not true, but we're in the top three. I think Lafayette Citizens Band, they were formed just after the Civil War. Hasn't been continuous, but they did reform before we did. So there's a lot of history like this. A lot of similarities between us and Lafayette. I'll talk about that a little later. But first, the commercial. Thane Campbell, our director, and I we met for breakfast this past winter, and we have similar resumes. We've both been director of the Erie Band, he of course is, and director of Huntington North, and director of Huntington North, and we agreed that maybe we were a little critical of how we recorded the band and how we told the stories or how we preserved things. We agreed that our predecessor, Doris Houston, did a great job. When I became director up there were programs from 1970, there were reel-to-reel tapes, which I think Michael Pettit has put digitally now, but he did a great job. But we also recognize that it's a busy job. You're always doing something, and you don't sit around and say, okay, we're going to record this. That's not a high priority. The high priority is what you're doing, presenting music, teaching, and for example, Huntington North. So that's why this organization is so very important, because you record the stories, and you keep the stories, and you teach the stories. You have programs like this, for the Historical Society, and because you do important things in the community. We do, I should say. I'm proud to be a member, and so I hope this evening's program is edifying for you. We'll also talk about another breakfast that that I participated in 2014, maybe early 2015, with this gentleman right here. Many of you recognize Bill Ritchie. Bill and I were eating breakfast at Nick's, and he was very excited. He was telling me about all the plans he had. He's a former director of the Erie Band at that time, and also our president. And all these plans that he had for the centennial. The following year was the 100th birthday of the Erie Band. And he was excited. I was encouraging him, that was great, it's really good. And I remember making a suggestion to him. I said, you know, Bill, what you should do is write a paper or write these things down so that we can record them that way too. People might want to be interested. And he says, well, the problem with that is that I didn't join the band until 1979. He grew up in Ohio, came here from college to be the choir director at Preston. He says, I don't know what happened to the band here before '79, but agreed it was a good idea. I think we talked with Thane, Tom McElhaney, maybe you know Tom. We talked with Martin Hall, and we came to the reluctant conclusion that the person best situated to write on the subject was me. Just out of coincidence, I joined the band in '74. I was a second generation member. My father played in the band after he came back from overseas. And when I joined in '74, there were still 2 members in the band that had joined before 1920, including one original member. And one of those 2 was Ethel Plaster, who is, I think many people in here knew him, a great teacher. I don't think you can have a conversation without teaching. And so he, like he did many young people, he took me under his wing, told me some of these stories. And so the result was this right here, Huntington's Erie Band, some memories from the band's first 100 years. And they have these over in the Indiana room if you'd like to know more or learn more about the subject tonight. A lot of the same pictures I'm going to show you will be in there, some of them that are not. But if you'd like to delve into something further, they'd love to have you over to Indiana, I think. But that was the result of that. To get to where the Erie band, oh, I'm sorry, I did want to say one more thing. Several of us in the room here tonight were good friends of Bill, and he was a good friend. He served our community for a long time, and I'd like to dedicate my part of the program tonight to his memory. He sure would like to be here tonight, that's for sure. Anyway, I do want to mention that also. Now, on to the educational part of our show. To talk about where the Erie Band came from, we really need to go back to military bands, and let's go back to the Revolution. The Revolutionary War. Each of us have seen paintings with the fife and drum and the banner right next to it. Fife and drum were easy to make. They could be heard from long distances. That fife with a high pitch and the drum. And it just was a musical way of saying, make way, there's a dangerous group coming through. You know, there's always some, there's always a statement that needs to be made. By the Civil War, brass instruments, kind of like the one I've got over here, were more prevalent. They were easy to make, maybe not quite as much as a drum or fife, but they could be heard. But there was, it wasn't as organized as it is today. It was, we got these instruments here, let's use these, and that was kind of what the band was. And that changed almost immediately after the Civil War with this gentleman right here, John Philip Sousa. He became the director of the Marine Band, the President's Own, in 1880. And he knew exactly how he wanted things. He said, no, this haphazard, no, I don't want that. Here, I want this many flutes, I want this many clarinets, I want this many cornets, I want saxophones. We love him for that. The saxophone was barely 30 years old at that time, and it was meant for the orchestra. The orchestra kind of said, you know, we're set, we don't really want it. But Sousa said, hey, I can use these. So he had a specific instrumentation in mind, and that was, he changed music almost instantly. The band looked more like an orchestra, had sections and everything. And he also, you have to remember at the time, that this was taken, the time Sousa was leaving the Marine Band, and the time the Erie Band was formed here in Huntington. There was no recorded music to speak of. You know, if you wanted to listen to music, you had to be in the room. You had to be in front of the group. Today, we can pick these things up, and, we can punch in music, and, very few people listen to it live anymore because it's so convenient. But the only way you could listen to music then was to have it in the room. And so you were kind of limited in what you could play. And you can imagine how an audience would feel with this wall of sound from this great big band with the sections and all of the things that they could do. It made a big impression. And so over the course of the next dozen years, Sousa had an influence on music. By 1892, he left the Marines, although he kept his title. He was lieutenant commander, I think, for the rest of his life. But he did leave the Marines, and he formed his own band. And by that time, he was so influential that he could pretty much have any musician that he wanted. If you were a musician and you were good, you wanted to play in his band, so he got to pick and choose. And so he had his first rehearsal. I need to tell you about this because it pertains to some things later on. He had his first practice, and of course, these are the best musicians probably in their instruments in the United States. And he comes out, he has them get out a march that he's written. And they do it. He turns to the first clarinet player, #1, probably the best clarinet player in the nation. He says, play the first 8 measures. And he played the first 8 measures, and of course the other musicians would say, well, we know why he's #1. Boy, that was really good. But Sousa said, okay, now play the 4th note a little shorter, accent this a little bit more, phrase through here, and he had about 6 or 8 suggestions that he wanted done. They weren't suggestions, they were commands. And the room got kind of awkward. He was giving a private lesson to probably the foremost clarinet player in the country. And so the clarinet player played it, and then he says, okay, a little bit more here, a little bit less here. And this went on for about 5 or 10 minutes, and finally got to the point where Sousa said, okay. He turned to the second clarinet and he says, play it just the way he did. The men in that room got a real quick education, I think, in military discipline. But it also showed how good Sousa was at music and who was in charge. And this band here, before I want to go on to the next one, but this band here was the 1893 band, one of his first ones. And he played in Huntington 3 times. The first time, we think in 1893. The library tells me that what they see as a 3 might be the right-hand side of the name. But somewhere in the 1890s, he played here in Huntington for the first time. And of course, it had a big effect just with everywhere he went with us. And he also affected us in ways. We're going to get off on a little rabbit trail here. Many of you might recognize this gentleman. Delmer Wiesner, yeah. Delmer Wiesner was the first full-time high school band director in Huntington County. And the city of Huntington hired him. He was licensed to teach government and civics. But the city schools of Huntington hired him to be their band director for one reason only. He was studying, he's a very good cornet player, and he was studying with a man named William Tong, who was a member of Sousa's band. And Delmer had met Sousa. What's that Ocean's movie? Hey, you shook Sinatra's hand? Yeah, well, that's kind of, Sousa was our Sinatra. He says, okay, Delmer shook Sousa's hand. But not only that, he attended rehearsals. He watched Sousa in rehearsal with the group. So the city schools of Huntington said, okay, we want this guy. That's who we want. And they couldn't have done a better job. He taught, he was a director just like Sousa, with that same discipline. And by 1926, he started with a band of freshmen and sophomores, maybe a dozen and a half or 2 dozen. And by 1930, they had a full band, and it was competing in the state, doing very well. And in the 1930s, competed nationally. They went to Chicago, were invited to go to Chicago and compete against other high school bands. And I don't know if you know this, Huntington High finished second in the nation in 1938. We're the second best high school band in the nation. And they were topped by the wrong direction. 1933, we won the national championship, Huntington High. This is the trophy now. It's in one of the museums here in town. I think maybe the courthouse. It might be here though, I don't know, I haven't looked. But this is the plaque, and I think it's, there needs to be more people to know that, hey, we won a national championship here. I talked with some of the members of that group, and they said that was real exciting, winning, being national champion, but the biggest excitement was when they came back to Huntington. Huntington threw a parade for them. It was a ticker tape parade. And I'm trying to picture how that would look in Huntington, but it might have been messy. Basically, that was a real thrill to be invited back home. And the thing about Delmer Wiesner, I can tell you firsthand, certainly when I was director of Huntington North, there were still traditions and practices that he put into place that we still used up there. One thing, for example, is competitiveness. You needed to compete. You need to be willing to compete. And we always had a good group going to state contests and competing there. And there are other things too. So Delmer Wiesner, directly impacted by John Philip Sousa, and he has affected music in our county ever since. He retired as a band director in 1963, but did eventually teach civics and government at Huntington High, Lancaster, I think also, and Huntington North. He taught the first year or two at Huntington North, had his classroom right across from the high school band room, and it's something he stretches from 1926 to Huntington North High School. And not part of your band, but I thought that was something you need to know. Sousa's plan in 1892 with his new band was to say, hey, we've got this new railroad thing going here. Why can't you put a band on there and we'll go and travel and perform in different places? He was one of the first that thought of this idea. Now this is actually the Erie line here. I thought we could combine a couple of things, but what they would do, there, they would travel, and I think that's, that's probably how we ended up in Huntington, because we had a depot here. We had a stop, and he played downtown, a couple of times. Last time in 1920, and Faye Campbell, our distinguished director of the Erie band, we were going to do a commemoration of that. It was right in the middle of COVID, and so we didn't get to do that. But that was 100 years from when he performed here last. When he performed the first time, after the first time, a lot of people said here in Huntington County, said, hey, we can do that. That's pretty cool. We can give instruments. And so we had bands springing up. By the time Sousa came back in 1913, there were a number of bands here in Huntington County. Service organizations, churches, businesses. One of the best was Schaff Brothers, were piano manufacturers downtown Huntington. They had a very good band. Huntington, the city, had a city band. Markle, Warren, Nippus all had town band, a community band. And so we really, we really reacted to him, and we were affected ever since. The Erie band, we're finally getting to that, the Erie Railroad formed their band in 1915. In 1915, the Erie Railroad decided that they would provide finances for each depot if they wanted to have their own band. And I think pretty much every depot did. Certainly we did. This is the first band. We have low brass and percussion on the top, and upper brass and woodwinds on the bottom row. They were all railroad employees except for, where's my little employee there? Oh, sorry about that. This gentleman right there, he was a senior in high school. His father was an employee. And so he was, and the director you see over here, his name was J.L. Swihart, and here's a better picture of him. Theodore Mackel was the superintendent of the Marion Division. He asked John Otis and H.C. Wyford, two employees, to form the band. And if you were looking for a director that you wanted to have, first choice, this is who you'd come up with. James Warren Swihart was the supervisor of music in the city schools of Huntington, supervisor of the teachers. He also, I know, worked with other groups in the community. He was the director of the city band, at least in 1912, and he consented to be the director of the Erie band. He led the Erie band for about 2.5 years, and in 1917 he went and took a similar position in Evanston, Illinois, as the supervisor of music for Evanston schools. And by 1920, he became the first band director at Northwestern University. So if you want to know what Erie band has in common with Northwestern University, this guy here started us both out. I should point out, we had him first. But that's, he was a very accomplished musician and composer and teacher. The Erie Railroad each summer would meet for a picnic, spend several days in one of the depots, one of the home depots. The first one with bands was 1915 in Salamanca, New York. This is the first performance of our Erie band. You see the picture here, the officials of the railroad, local officials up here, the band here. They also competed in track and field, and some other officials over here. And of course we competed with bands too. We have to know who the best band is. Huntington finished 7th that year, out of probably 2, maybe 3 dozen bands. Okay, that's pretty good, but that wasn't good enough. Apparently there was a little controversy that first time. This group from New York City, apparently they used what's called ringers. Some of these individuals were not employees of the railroad, they were just musicians. And so they said, hey, listen, if we're going to compete, we're not going to have any of this from the wealthy cities. We're going to, so after that, our Erie band never finished worse than 3rd. So I think that tells you a little bit about our musicianship and our leadership. As a matter of fact, in 1 year, we did win the band. We were the best, I think 1918, maybe 1919, we were declared the best band along the Erie Railroad. This group here, I should point out, you might have noticed here, the bass drum is still here in existence. We were not called the Erie Band. All of them were Erie bands. We were called Mackel's Band. After Theodore Mackel, the superintendent of the Marion Division. And that's how they distinguished themselves. But also, I think there was some respect for him also, appreciation. And so he supported the band. He was the one that asked to start the railroad. And so that's what was also those interesting things. Waste coming from there. In 1916, the Erie Railroad picnic was here in Huntington. They came out here in Hyers Park and spent several days there. And in honor of that event, our director, Swihart, had written a march, a Sousa-type march, in that honor. And so every time a delegation from one of the depots would arrive, they would be greeted with that march. It was, I think it was the only time they did that because it was, everybody agreed it was a great piece of music. And I think the following year, whoever it was, they said, you know, we can't do that well. So it was the only time that happened. But the railroad was so pleased with it that they published it under the name Erie Lines West. And it was part of our legend there. A little news item about it there. And by that time, it was mentioned Erie Band in capital letters. And anyway, this picture was taken in 1917, and this is just before Swihart, who was right there, left for Evanston. There are two other directors in here, Elmer Ron, right in here, I think, and Judd Miller, I think it's that one there. When Swihart left, he was replaced by one of our trumpet players, Judd Miller. We don't know as much about him, but he was from Columbia City, worked on the railroad. His granddaughter still lives here in Huntington, and I guess I graduated, didn't know this at the time, graduated from high school with his great-grandson, Brian Brumley. He lives in Florida now, but he was, again, a very good musician, very accomplished musician. A couple of points, I've tried to get verification, I'm not sure this is, but I've read that when Miller was director, they formed a training band, 1918, 1919, 1920, in those years, where they took young people, taught them how to play the instruments, give them a band experience, and a chance to play music in a band. That might have been one of the steps that led to Delmer Leaster being hired in 1926, just a few years later, as these musicians started to develop. Things were, they were playing in the community among the other bands. You see the Still Mackerel's band. That's a pretty close shot, too, I think. They had to post pretty nice for that one. It was a very accomplished group and developing a lot of programs. There you go. No, sorry, I missed that. Let me get back to that one. No, sorry. Well, actually, that's a picture you don't really need to see. 1922, in June 1922, the National Railroad decided that they were going to drop wages by 7 cents an hour, and this didn't sit real well. As a matter of fact, it didn't sit at all. And so there was a strike that started in the summer of 1922. And it was, if I'd asked people, if I'd asked this group in here, say, what's the biggest scandal in history, United States history, you'd probably say Watergate. Well, before Watergate, they would have said Teapot Dome. And Teapot Dome was part of the problem with the railroad strike. The Attorney General was perhaps a little underhanded. It made it an uglier strike. But for our purposes, what made it uglier was that the railroad had a problem because all these bands that they formed in 1915, well, now they could play music to support the strikers. And that's what every one of them did, except one. Judd Miller and band president John Otis determined that Huntington's band would be neutral. It would be for or against. And I don't know the reason for this. I've got a couple theories that I want to share. One of our members here at the Historical Society is Mike Perkins, and he mentioned one time that in print that the Erie Band has always had support in the community, but it's always had good leadership. And obviously this is an example of good leadership. They say, listen, we don't want to get in the middle of this, we want to protect our band. That might be a possibility. I also wonder too if the relationship was a little bit different between employee and management here. They named their band after their superintendent. They had to have good feelings about it. So maybe that was another factor. You know, I said, we're not taking sides because it's like when two of your friends are fighting, both of you get along. You know, it could have been something like that. But the result was predictable. The railroad says, okay, we own these instruments of music. We're going to take them back, we're going to ship them to Huntington. And that's exactly what they did. That's what I want to take next. There's a whack my light there. Some of you know Doug McElhaney. This is, he came across this a few years back, one of the original instruments that we got shipped. And I brought one here. This is another one here. It might be not the same one, is it? I don't know, it might be. But it has the Erie Railroad engraving on it. And you want to take a look at it. I think the Riches let me borrow that. Is that the one, Mary? Yeah, I was going to say. And so I got that last night, and so you're welcome to take a look at that. That is an example of what Huntington had. And you might think, well, hey, you had it made. We had all these instruments, all this music, but we had personnel problems. With the strike, they had to transfer and move people around to cover the jobs. And so a lot of Huntington's workforce got shipped to Chicago or further east. So our talent pool was decimated, and that included our director, Judd Miller. He was transferred to Ohio with the Ohio shop, so we had no director. We had maybe half the musicians we had, and we had a ton of music and instruments, but very few musicians. So the good thing about that is that the cavalry arrived. Elmer Ron. Elmer Ron had he'd been away from Huntington for 2 years. He was living in Chicago studying music. And just so happened he was done. He came back in summer of 1922, and we had a lot of problems we had to deal with, no structure for our band, and he stepped in, became the director, and rebuilt the band. And I think by all accounts, he did a fairly good job. By 1930s, the band was at full strength, and he proved himself an able leader, able musician, and gave the band its structure and some identity. By 1930, they were playing in a lot of places. Of course, they had the railroad they could travel, and they started playing at this motor race they started having in Indianapolis that was starting to get a little popularity, down at the 500. Now, this is marked the 500 at Indianapolis. I'm not sure that it is. It kind of looks like it might be Huntington Speedway. Yeah. But this one is for sure. That one is verified. That is down in Indianapolis. They got off the train. They're getting ready to go into the Speedway. And there's a lot of stories I can tell you about that. Looks like they're getting ready. If I didn't want that picture taken, but it's good for our purposes. One year, they performed down in Indianapolis for the 500, probably 6 or 8 years. One year, they took off from the train station out here, and they got as far as Peru, and one of the musicians had forgotten his instrument. And you might think, even many of you knew Elmer Ron, very nice band, but you might think, well, you forget your instrument, you're in trouble. But it was actually Elmer Ron who said, "Where's my horn?" when they got to Peru. And they did manage to contact Huntington. It was left on the sidewalk out there. They shipped it on the next train, but it didn't get there in time. So Elmer didn't get to play that year. But before you're too critical, there's several band directors in this room here. We have more to get ready. All the musicians have to do is an instrument. So we have all the band to get ready. So I think Elmer could be excused for that one lapse. This is 1938. These are actually advertising new uniforms. 1934, 35, the band's original uniforms were 20 years old, and they thought, you know something, we need to get some new uniforms. So they got also got a drum major's uniform, double-breasted suits that looked very classy for the day. Drum major's uniform probably doing more marching. And so this picture here was actually posed to advertise an ice cream social they were playing at. But they also played, like I said, at the 500. They played at political rallies of both parties. They played also for the 4-H fair started up in the 1930s. Kind of new. Sometimes we don't take the new things very comfortably. And they said, well, you know, how can we make sure people show up for our 4-H fair? Invite the Erie Band. So the Erie Band played the first year, and I think that I think the 4-H fair's gotten off to a good start. Then the Erie Band played it for the 4-H fair every year until I want to say maybe the mid-late 80s. And there's a good relationship there, and one of many. These uniforms here were used until the mid-1950s when they bought new jackets. The railroad, they saved up, they bought, I think, 50 new uniforms, jacket-type uniforms. In 1976, they stopped using those, and then in the early 80s, Notre Dame called us up and said, listen, we've got our old uniforms, would you like to have them? It's free, so I think Bill said yes. Bill Ritchie was director at that time. And so we used those very briefly because, and you probably see what the problem was, Notre Dame plays in the fall in cold weather, and we play in the summer, and the wool uniforms didn't really sit real well, so they didn't last very long. Today, we have a uniform that the band members bought. Nice golf shirts to fit our style. If you want to take a Stephanie, show the shirt, if you can see them up, those are, I think, very dignified, and they're very comfortable. Thanks for wearing that tonight. I think the uniforms also reflect the times. We might say, well, we wouldn't put a band in that today, but at the time it looked very dignified. Those were very good uniforms, likewise later on. And there's a good picture too, some stand bass drummers. I think here in the village somewhere. I think we'll have to look around and see. It's a parade obviously down on Jefferson. Not where the Heritage Office, it predated that, but an earlier parade, perhaps a centennial in 1948, although I would say there was a lot of people there for that, and I would guess that it was probably limited. That's an actual photo there of the parade. World War II came and had an effect like it did on our world, and a lot of the men were overseas. And I had no proof of this or evidence. I'm trying to find out. I have talked with people who said that during World War II, Uncle Ron used women. Women hadn't been part of the band before that. And if they were, they weren't in very, maybe just for a performance or two for parts that we needed. I don't really know the story, but there were several people that I know did tell me that. One woman that had a distinct influence on the Erie band is Helen Thomas Brooker. She was a local vocalist. Actually, she was under contract with the NBC Orchestra. She sang, I should say, the New York Metropolitan, and was a very good singer. She was actually told that one time at a concert. She sang with the Erie band in a concert. It was one part of the concert. The Erie band would play some hymns, I think it was, and invited the audience to sing along. And Helen noticed a young girl near the front row singing up bold and strong. And she went up to the girl afterwards and said, you sing really, really fine, and I heard you. And the little girl looked at her and said, well, you sang good too. Thomas Brooker was also conducted the Erie band, a guest conductor. Her big claim to fame, she wrote and recorded the war song Marching on to Victory. And matter of fact, it was published on Tipton Street over here. And that's kind of what she was famous for. But she was conducting the Erie band on another piece of music. And the musicians kind of got together and said, work this out. And so when she gave downbeat, they played Marching on to Victory. And she probably kept going. But she also was a very important member of the group. After the Second World War, the band numbers really increased. The band came home, plus the ones that were kind of filling in while they were gone. They reached a high of 60 members. Early 1950s, around 1950. They were still, Erie Railroad was still having their summer picnics, but after World War II, they were having them mainly in two places that were centrally located. One was Crystal Lake in Ontario, Canada, and then this picture was taken at Conneaut Lake in Pennsylvania. Every summer, the men would go there. But this picture was taken in 1952 at Conneaut Lake, and I included another one because Kevin did a really nice job getting that picture ready. It didn't look that good when I put it in here. This is also a Conneaut Lake, but it's a 1957 picture in the Herald Press. Just some people I know that might be in here. I think this gentleman here, some of you know Tom McElhaney. I think somebody may know Tom McElhaney. So this is his father Don, played percussion in the Erie band. Glenn Scarborough was a local band director. He was still playing in the 90s. This is my father here, Richard Whitaker, also playing. Did go there, I think it was here. I think this is, well, no, I'm not sure. This is Richard Law, Elmer's son. I'm pretty sure of that. Norris Houston. Ralph Thomas was the drum major. Does anybody see any else that they recognize? So, two people that you might recognize or might know. Louis Durflinger was in there too. He was a Grant County band director. It's hard to see there. Elmer was very proud and cultivated band directors, high school band directors. You remember the first Erie band, they were kind of a little upset when people used ringers. Well, when you're the only band left, it's okay. So that one really cultivated local high school band directors. These are band directors that were in the band, playing in the band in 1960. And I don't know, did Marvin Hall, is he here? Marvin was missing here. Marvin was not available for the picture. Either he got down early or didn't miss that night. But some of these, I saw like Mr. Hernandez was from Wells County. Pete Strobel here was from Wabash County. North Houston, Selma Ron. Earl King. Earl King probably gets the award for the longest commute to play in the Erie band. He was a trombone player. He was a band director from Bartow, Florida. And he spent his summers here. Louis Durflinger, he was still playing in the 1990s. Keith Fox is the only person from this picture still living. He lives in Columbia City. And this is my father, Richard Whitaker, taught in 1960 at Dallas Township School in Andrews. Louis Durflinger from Grant County. Keith, Whitley County. I think the picture says this is Len Seas, but it looks an awful lot like Jim Carroll. And I'm not sure. Jim Carroll was a full-wing band director. He was offered the first to be the first band director at Huntington North. And he mentioned to me that he considered himself a full-wing guy, and so he went there, spent his career there. And of course, it's like in North Houston, which was a good choice. Mac Walker was bassoonist, was the band director at Crestview Junior High. At this time, he was at, I think, Roanoke, wasn't he? Was it Jackson Township? Yeah, Jackson Township School there. And so once I come back to Pete Strobel briefly, Pete became the director of the Indiana State School Music Association. So in essence, he became our state's chief band director. Elmer really cultivated those groups and those directors, and the members really appreciated them. You might think, well, there's some jealousy involved. Not at all. The employees realized that when you have band directors in there, the level of music goes up. You can play better music, you become a better player, and the directors appreciated the fact that they didn't have to do any work. You know, they had to do a lot of work with their own bands. All they had to do here was just arrive and show up, and Elmer took care of everything. So it was a really good relationship. 30 years later, the band is celebrating its 75th birthday. We took another picture, and there are several gentlemen that are in both pictures. Marvin Hall, who was supposed to be, Louis Durflinger, my father, Richard Whitaker, and Norris Houston have been in the earlier picture. This is Thing Campbell. There. The only person in there still teaching music today is Doug Hofer, right there. Doug's been at Salamone since 1985, I think, and he was the band director of Salamone then. Bill Ritchie. Troy Albright was the assistant director at the high school at that time, trombone player. And this pretty lady here on the end is my wife, was at the time also. Diane Whitaker, she was the band director at Riverview Middle School, I think, by that time. And we'll pass over that young guy in the middle, that dark-haired fellow I don't recognize. Then Thing Campbell took another picture just a few years ago. This is maybe about 10 years ago. And you still see some of the same. Marvin Hall, still there. If he just showed up that first time, he could have been in all three pictures. But there's Marvin, Thing, Tom McElhaney, myself, Bill Ritchie. These are the members, John and Joan Gardner. John was the assistant band director of Huntington North for many years. And Deb Nicholas, I think, is here tonight. This is Deb Bickle, and she's sitting right there. And this was taken at the Forest. You can see the pictures down there. And a little bit there. So, Elmer Ron. This was kind of our home in the summer. Was the old pavilion at Hyers Park. And it was, this is, by the way, this is a practice. I know he's in coat and tie, but it was also a different time. I don't think most people don't show that looking that good at a concert anymore. But it shows, I kind of like that picture. He was a unique conductor, and he had, a lot of leadership styles. One of the things that he was not You know, today we have directors that move all over the place, you know, and they almost dance up there. Not Elmer. He stayed within his little box here, and I used to be able to do a good impersonation of his downbeat. It was, you know, that was something like that. And so what you did, you watched his baton go down, and then you listen real careful to everybody else. That's what I learned. We would practice on the stage. Sometimes there'd be chairs, and sometimes we would use these benches out there. There were no chairs, they pull those benches up, and we practiced on those. They got kind of hot in the summer. We did practice occasionally in winter, and we would do that at the depot, where it was the exact opposite. It was cold. It wasn't really insulated real well. It was up on the second floor, that room on the second floor. Once or twice in the winters, someone would have us get together. I think he would kind of experiment with what music he wanted to play the following summer. But I remember being very cold in there and looking forward to sweating to death when we got to Irish Park every summer. Elmer also had he had a unique style. I know we got some musicians here, but when you watch a conductor conducting, the downbeat of the measure is always down, 2 is to his left, beat 3 over here to the right, and 4, the last beat is always up. So if you're a comiton, it's down, left, right, up. Or you know, times we talk about it's what you point to: floor, door, window, ceiling. You know, that's pretty much what we do. Elmer had something that I'd never seen before or since, but it intrigued me. Instead of going left on 2, he would put a circle. It'd be 1 circle, 3, 4. 1 circle, 3, 4. And I thought about that for a while. Why would he do that? Why would that happen? And I think it's probably the period of time he was trained. Today, of course, you got to do one of these things for you got to, but not so in Elmer's day. It was pretty basic, you know, and you talk. So if you did the down, left, right, up, your hands were smashing, or you had that worry about smashing in the middle. If you did a circle, you didn't worry about that. Every hand stayed where it was. And each concert, and when I was directing every concert, I do the same thing. And when I'm in front of your band, I'll take one measure and I'll do it Elmer Ron's way, because he's still part of the band, and still is for me too. He was not, and my mother's here tonight. She told me this story about the first time she heard the Erie band. You expect an ensemble to sound like maybe Huntington the Rooks, you know, and Elmer was not a tall man. He kind of went out and he moved slowly. And so she was like, well, that's what the band's going to sound like. You just kind of mentally accept that. And of course, there was a bunch of band directors in there, a lot of brass players, and she was just, you know, bowled over by the big wall of sound that came over here. And it was you could lead without being demonstrative, and he was a good leader in that regard. He could also be firm. I mentioned Earl King from Florida. Earl spent summers up here. He married a Memphis girl, so they would come up here, and he hadn't been in Indiana very long, but Erie Band had his first concert in the summer. He said, I really shouldn't play because I haven't practiced this again. But he went to the concert to enjoy the concert. Well, Elmer saw him. He says, well, you're back? He said, well, yeah, I didn't want to play without practicing. No, I said, no, you grabbed a bass drum now. Here, you play bass drum tonight. And I know that Elmer did it a couple of times. If you were in the Erie Band and you showed up at a concert, you better come prepared to play, because Elmer was going to see that you play. He had a forcefulness about him, and put it in a kind-hearted way. In 1962, the band members, on the occasion of Elmer's 40th anniversary of leaving the band, 1922 to 1962, they gave him a commemorative baton. And this is an interesting picture. I know it seems kind of informal. It was after one of the concerts. But here's something that I want you to notice. Elmer had one of those smiles that you could recognize if you were close. You know, and back a ways, if you say, well, he's not smiling, but you got to go, yeah, he is. But look, the camera's quite a ways away. That looks like a smile to me. It pleased him. This really pleased him. He was very happy with this. I think my impression of it was that I think he understood the service that he gave to the community. There's no doubt about that. But I think the priority in his mind was the men and the musicians in the group. That's what meant the most to him. It meant a lot to him that he provided a good, positive, meaningful musical experience for those players. They were special to him. And I think that's what brought that smile out. And pleased with that. And there's further evidence. This picture was taken about a decade later. The community started recognizing him and honoring him. And if you look and there's some other pictures there too, but the place is on that was his baton that the players gave it to him. The people here in the picture, the Kaisers, Shirley Kaiser was a member of the band, and they were hosting this. She's been there for many years. Ivo Plaster, other than Elmer, was a senior member in the band at that time. He was a member since 1919. And I had, when we were talking about Ivo, got to encourage everybody, look at this display back here. He's got his trumpet back there, and he's a brass player. He played sousaphone when I knew him, and I just recognized the face. I know who owns his sousaphone now. It's Bruce Lamar sitting right over here. And I know it's still in good shape. When I knew him, and when I played the Erie band, Eiffel was older than, he didn't quite get inside the sousaphone ring very well, so he would twist the mouthpiece out, he'd reach his arm through to reach the valves and stay outside. And I don't know why that stayed with me, but it did. Elmer, of course, Doris Houston. This is Ralph Thomas. He was a percussionist and also the drum major band when they marched the parades. And I think that the recognition of the band, the appreciation of the band was very important to Elmer. I think probably everybody in the room remembers the ceremonies on July 4th every summer. This is Frank Carey and the band would play just off to the left of the platform they would put on the 50-yard line. This looks like it was 1972. It was fun playing down there. We used chairs from the Merck's Funeral Home. And they were pretty good chairs. They were nice chairs. They were rounded. They weren't overly big, so they weren't super comfortable. But they had a cushion on them. They were rounded, so you had room for your instrument. One year, it rained. I mean, it was just a deluge on July 4th. There was no question it was going to be postponed because you couldn't even sit in the rain. And so they had the ceremony on July the 5th. And we got there, the band got there, we sat down, and they hadn't taken the chairs off of the field. And the cushions didn't look wet. It was leather type thing. So you can guess, we sat down and nobody wanted to get up until it was dark. Every year it was a very good ceremony, but there were some informalities to it. One year I do remember the PA system didn't work at Craig Bomb. And of course the speakers had to be heard in that big stadium, so they drove a police squad car out on the football field and faced it toward the audience. All the speakers would get in the car or speak through the car to speak. Bill Ritchie told me one time when he was director, Ernie Bailey was overseeing the July 4th ceremonies. And like I said, there was a certain informality. Bill's cue to start playing, Ernie would wave his cane. Go now. And so it was always a fun time. We weren't quite sure what was going to happen there, but you knew you were going to be entertained. And of course, it ended with the fireworks at the end of the ceremony. This picture was taken in 1965. A couple of interesting things about this. This is the 50th anniversary concert of the Erie Band. First of all, you see Elmer at the microphone. That did not happen very often. Let's say it happened very rarely. Usually it was Dick Creed, who's a saxophone trumpet player with the band. He's very entertaining. Tonight, on this night, Elmer took the microphone and introduced these people here. These are original members of the band from 1915. That he introduced them. And I remember that he went down each one and talked about each one, and I guess it stood out to me because it was when he was talking, but also you can see that he cared very much about the memories that these men had made. And I think it was another example of what I mentioned to you earlier, that he really, that his top priority was the players, that he wanted them to have a good musical experience, and that was especially, you see the piano out there, there's some other people on the program. One of them was, the marimba player, Rosella Cole. She was on the program that night also. And it was a full picture. That's all I want to say about that. Again, this is Ralph. This is marching down Cherry Street, the Erie Band. This is, must be a hot day. They're not wearing jackets. I don't know where the picture, but that's probably in the, I would say, would you say the early, maybe mid-60s? This is from 1974. Probably 1974 was a better year. They had the jackets on there. And this was taken in 1975, quite probably, well, this is the last parade that Elron marched in with the band. And not with an instrument, but it's a parade, some brasses, some percussion there, marching here in Huntington. I think that was the last year that the Erie band marched in Huntington was in 74 or 75. And they did not march after 75. This is more typical of the band. I see the top picture there. The courthouse program. This particular program had the choirs from two of the churches. St. Peter's, I think, was one of them. Second Christian, I think, was the other. And they combined to play with the Erie band. Looks like for a Memorial Day service. More typical of the performances the Erie band was doing at that time. Moonlight Baptist, downtown. Remember when we had the mall downtown? And we would play, I think most of the time in front of Nick's kitchen. This is 75. And we get good pictures from the Herald Press. During the summer of 75 and 76, again, we had a couple winter rehearsals at the Home Depot, and I heard some of the railroad guys talking about, merger, the railroad may be going out, and of course it did. On April 1st of 1976, Conrail absorbed the Erie Lackawanna into its organization. The Erie Railroad ceased to exist. This is a picture of the last train, last Erie Lackawanna train to leave. There wasn't a lot of time. I don't remember anything really being said about the band not continuing. But it was, I thought, of course we're going to be continuing. Elmer had music already and set and ready to go. But 3 weeks after this event happened, Elmer died somewhat unexpectedly, right before the beginning of the summer season. And that did have an effect. There was, our organizer, our foundation wasn't there. Would the band continue? And the band obviously did, largely due to several people. One was Doris Houston. One was Richard Ron. A lot of you know Dick Ron. He was Elmer's son. He had been an officer band. He was treasurer. He took care of payroll, bankroll, and he worked very hard, I think probably in honor of his father, to keep the band going. Norris Houston had been Elmer's assistant for many years, and so he agreed that he would be the director for that summer. He was still the band director of Huntington North, but he says after school year starts, you need to get somebody else. Tom McElhaney was the other director that they kind of shared time a little bit. We also had several practices led by the band director at the time at Manchester College. And I wish I remember his name. His first name was Jack. He was a trumpet player, and I remember I enjoyed him also. He was a very good director. So it was a haphazard year. I say Norris Houston was our director. We notice this is not Hyers Park. And I'm not sure what the circumstances were, but that was not available to us. This is actually the Republican Party headquarters at the time, downtown. I think not far from the party shop. So people had played it at that time. Do you remember which one it was? It was downtown, I remember.
It's on that Newman Street.
Is it? Okay. I can picture myself getting there, but I don't remember how I got there. Where's my...
That's Debbie right there.
Yes, I was saying, there's some people here. Nancy Hickory still plays in the band today. Once again, Debbie Mickle is right there. Sitting right over here right now. Next there's Chip Owen and a flute piccolo. Dick Creed did the announcing for the band for many years. This is Dick Ron. Trina Toth was a saxophone player. Judd Smith. Looks like Rolita Richardson maybe. And looks like Don McElhaney there. Can you see the sousaphone there without a player sticking his head through? I think that's Eiffel right there. It is.
I think that's Nancy Chen, honey.
Oh, Nancy Chen, I bet it is. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
John Henry.
Is that John Henry?
Yeah.
Okay. He's kind of dark.
Frank Christian back there standing. Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
right there?
Frank Christian.
Yeah. Playing percussion. He also was vocalist with the band for a while, Mr. Christian. And I think we gave about everybody in the picture. Dick Schreiber on the clarinet. And of course, you can't see half the band, but the brass are behind here. And that's what we practiced in 1976. Following that year, Tom McElhaney stepped forward and took the directing duties, and he was the band director at that time at Crestview Junior High at that time. So our practices were at Crestview, where Yeoman Park is now. Excuse me. And that was what we practiced until, through Bill Ritchie also. So for more than a decade we were there. And then back to Hyers Park, and this summer, though, the one and only summer, you see a picture of us practicing in the storefront. You know it was 1976. Some changes after 76. The band directors, very loyal to Elmer Ron, very few of them played after his passing. And it became, under Tom's leadership, it became much more of a community band, much more like what you have today. I joined in '74. The differences I can see is that I remember that it was much more social here. I talked with a former member of the band last night and said, "Do you remember my father?" And no, they didn't socialize all that much. They were there for the music. And I know in my case, they certainly weren't there to babysit some high school kid. They were there to take the music seriously, so there wasn't a lot of conversation. You hear us warming up. Albert did most of the talking, but once you kind of made it co-ed, and you brought in obviously younger people. I think this is Chip Owen here, and the bassoon player looks like probably a high school. I don't.
Arlene Chris.
Arlene Chris, thank you very much. That was, it became it became all legitimately a community band at that time. And Tom was director for about, maybe a little bit more than 2 years. But he made huge changes that are very important to the band and that we still recognize today. The band that he left behind is very much like the band that Thane Campbell leads right now. And he made that, it's kind of a tough transition. The Erie Railroad hadn't really supported the band directly in probably 3 decades, but still there was that sponsorship there. And you went from having that, and if not dependence, at least that association, to being completely independent. And the city, I should say, also opened its arms, was very welcoming and supportive, not just the official city, but the community, the members themselves, the citizens. And that meant a lot also. Bill Ritchie took over then after Tom McElhaney. He came to Huntington in 1978 and was a big Ohio State fan. We forgave him for that because he was from Ohio. This is a picture. He was he never was a member of the band before becoming director. And he told me a great story one time. His first practice, he liked to go through a lot of music, read through a lot of music. And there was one member, John Henry, that I think Ed mentioned earlier, that says, "Oh, you need to take more breaks." And after the rehearsal, Bill found out why he wanted to take breaks is because John wanted to smoke and take a little smoking break. But he learned his way and became a very important member of our community. And you see Doris Houston behind him there. And I think this young lady here is Jennifer Farkas, who also got a music degree. Married, lives in Chicago now. And looks like it's outside of might be a Memorial Park or maybe Sunken Gardens. Not sure. This is Bill again. They did tear the pavilion down at Hyers Park and built the pole barn that's there now. Very utilitarian sort of room building. And someplace we don't visit during 4-H Fair Week. In 19 1986, Bill had a couple daughters and was looking to spend a little bit less time with the band. He also had some family in Ohio that he needed to spend time with. And he asked me if I would help in some of the rehearsals, and I was glad to do that. After 1986, he said, listen, why don't you just do it? And I was real happy with that and enjoyed myself. This is the band, obviously, Second Gardens. I don't know the year, but we enjoyed playing down there. It was hard to get through that tunnel. Fortunately, at the time, when I drove a car, it was about as wide as this podium, and we loaded things in there and get that in. You see, the chairs now are not from the Merce Funeral Home anymore, just in case it rains. They were from Calvary Baptist Church, and my father and I would, he would be right there. He and I would each, before each concert, go pick up the chairs and set them up. Enjoyed a lot of time getting to see some people in here, and Doug Colfer. This is Louis Durflinger, Madonna Hostler. We can't recognize these people from the back. I'm pretty sure this is Doug McElhaney. Jay Hostler, a very good French horn player. I mentioned this lady here because she's my wife, Diane. I want to be able to say that I mentioned her. Doris Houston, Jennifer Farkas. I'm sorry, that's Doris Houston. That's Dick Scheiber, I'll mention. And Tim Klein, I'm sure Bruce Lamar's in here somewhere, a couple percussionists. Dick Creed. I found out that I didn't know this until a couple years ago. My wife did some research. When Second Gardens was built, the original plan was to make it an amphitheater for band concerts. And apparently the cost of that made them adjust their plans to the Second Gardens. And I always like the fact that the Erie band utilizes Second Gardens because those are two things that most communities don't have. They're very rare. We are the only Erie Railroad band, and there aren't too many places that have a place like Second Gardens. Again, this is still Second Gardens, another concert. I like this. Everybody in this picture is the band director, so you probably don't have, except for one person. This is Mike Pollock. Very good trombonist, but everybody else is Louis Durflinger. Scott Hickensteel was St. Campbell's assistant for about 87 years, I think, a long time. He's now the director of bands at Shepherd's University in Virginia. Norris Houston, my father, you can kind of see there, my wife Diane, Doug Hofer, and I can't quite tell, so this might be Ethel Linda Arlington. Does anybody else recognize anybody different? I might. Right there? Oh, Norris Houston. Yeah, Norris Houston, yeah. I think that's Ethel Linda, Louis Durflinger, Scott Hickensteel, my dad, Diane, this skinny guy here, and Mike Pollock is the trombonist. He was the one civilian in there. Downtown is, this is during Heritage Days. Again, I don't know the year, probably 88, 89. I need to mention Gene Andrews was always so kind, helpful over at Nick's Kitchen, pulling things out for us, water when she thought we were thirsty, and that was a good, fun place to play. One year I was down there, I remember this because the band was not very happy with me. We had some white pencils made, and the idea is for the finale we would play Stars and Stripes Forever, and then invite children to come out and they could wave and they would conduct the Erie band. And we made arrangements. I would hold like one or two, would take certain repeats multiple times. Well, and I thought maybe half a dozen kids. We had a line halfway down Jefferson Street, and this is a tough piece of music to play, kind of taxing. So we had to conduct a couple seconds and move on. I got some dirty looks from the players after that one. That was a taxing afternoon, but it was something fun to see the kids up there. I tried to find a picture. One of them was my young daughter, and I couldn't find the picture. But I may be prejudiced, but I thought it was the cutest picture of all of them. In 1990, again, very fortunate for me, when I was director, the band celebrated its 75th birthday. And you can see what we did. This is in July 1990. We celebrated the same place in Elmore had 25 years earlier at the stage at the Irish Park. We had the St. Peter and Paul Church Choir singing with us. They sang the national anthem and also some other selections. We had a filled arena, filled pavilion. If you remember the windows, the wooden latches on the outside, they were opened up and people were standing outside those in cars, sitting in cars. We fit about as many people in as could fit there. It was just a huge audience. You can see in the front, before the band played, we had the members come earlier, like I think it was 11:30 or 12. We had a carry-in lunch, carry-in meal for and cake for the band members. It's a fun afternoon. It's a good afternoon. Probably see some people in there that we recognize. I remember Tom Schreiber sang. When Tom Schreiber sang, you saw that. And I remember Tom. I think he's right there. I think he's there somewhere. Nancy still plays in the band now. Thurman Poe, Tom McElhaney, P.S.J. Hostler, Jim Magano was flutist, oboist, flute. Jim Magano. He played in the band. That's it. Tom Smith, trumpet player, he soloed that day. Madonna Hostler, we were frequently there. And fortunately, the weather cooperated. It was a beautiful day. At the time we played that, the Vice President of the United States was from Huntington, and he sent us a nice card even. I think the mayor was there. We had some other people that helped us celebrate. It was a good day. We have something to play for you. I could do that here, Ken. I'm amazed we found this. We're going to have a video step back in the past. We got a lot of attention when we turned 75. The Journal Gazette in Fort Wayne, a couple of newspaper papers up there, the news television.
Festival Fun is brought to you by your Fort Wayne area hometown Pizza Hut restaurants.
We've got bed races going on behind us. It's one of the fun things at Heritage Days. You know, Huntington has a rich heritage that it celebrates each year. And this year, one of that special celebration activities, the 75th anniversary to a musical organization. And 21 Alive salutes the Erie Band. This is the 1990 Erie Band, but it got its start in 1915. The first all-volunteer band was equipped and uniformed by the Erie Railroad, and over the years, hundreds of area residents have been a part of the organization.
It was family. My father had been the director since 1922, a charter member since 1915, and it was part of the family. And I was an Erie employee, and Dad was too, and so we just stayed with it.
Members range in age from the teens to the 70s, and many have been with the group for decades.
I enjoy the people, and I enjoy the music we play. It's good, fun music.
I'll enjoy the fellowship and playing with the other guys, and we have a good time back there.
All the musicians say they play for their own enjoyment, but some have an even more personal reason for involvement.
We'll have a lot of people who really appreciate it. A lot of people come up and say something to us that they like it and so forth. So it's as much fun for the conductors as it is the players. It's a chance also to return a little bit of what the community's given to me. I got a good education in band when I was in school, and so this is my way of providing a little bit of it too.
In spite of the demise of the Erie Railroad in 1976, band members and the community say the Erie Band will continue as part of Huntington's heritage for years to come. And members of the band have been with us throughout the day down here. They're here again tonight, entertaining us as we go with all the festivities. And Keith Edwards will be back with some more of the fun after this message from Pizza Hut.
That was amazing fun. That was Channel 21 came down and did that, and I think everybody in there was a little younger back then. But we got some attention for that, and the Auburn Community Band noticed it, and I got contacted by their director and their president. Said, listen, we saw that, we think it'd be fun, maybe we'll get together. So they came down here, we met at a restaurant, I think maybe the show lounge out there by the bypass, and we said, well, let's do something together. So we, on one Sunday that summer, we went up to Auburn and played on their bandstand by the courthouse. And then the following week, they came back down here and played at Sunday Gardens, and we practiced together. And so the Erie Band went on the road again, first time in 30 years. And it was, and we still enjoy a close association with the Auburn Band. Fane takes us up to play in their band festival every summer, and I think it's fun because we are, well, I think we're the best, but also we're the biggest, and we also have the coolest uniforms. So it's a great concert. If you get a chance, it's usually in mid-July, late July thing, and August, I'm sorry. In August, and it's a great show, good attendance. I want to mention something else that reminded me up there. You saw on the news item the Elmer Ron March. That was written by Jim Collins in honor of Elmer Ron, obviously. And Elmer Ron actually had the band play it. It was a good march, but he was a little embarrassed, and so he took on every single part. He took and marked out the name, the title. So when the band got it, we didn't know what the title was. But Elmer just felt uncomfortable having his name on that. It was causing a little bit too much attention. So, but we once we had the computer technology, we put that print and we put his title back up on there. It was in about '93. I really needed to step down. I was director of bands and chairman of the music department at Newton County. And you have to be a real Hoosier now. Again, you probably know where Newton County is because you're from Lafayette. But it was a long trip. I would spend my summers, how did I do that? Let's see, Wednesday through Saturday, I would be with my high school band through the summer. And then Saturday we would take off, and I'd spend Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday over here with concerts outside of here. My wife got tired of that. I don't understand that. She's just being unreasonable. But somebody to change. So I did ask to step down. Unfortunately, we had a very good, capable leader, Thane Campbell. He's been leading the band now for almost 30 years. Matter of fact, I think this is 30. Is it next year 30 years? This is one of his concerts here in Sucker Gardens, and by the willow tree. And a few other people you might, I think Bill Ritchie, is that Harley Hobson? Looks like, is that North Houston? Okay, one was his Nancy. That's just a great place to play. The acoustics down there are really good. Club saxophone played down there a couple years ago. Mayor Fetters wanted us to, we want you playing there, so we did. And Thane was up along the rim, and he said, 7 saxophones, we're not going to be able to hear that very far. You could hear it clear out along the street. That is very well made for music and for sound, and they didn't suck it. It wasn't an amphitheater like they wanted, but they made it just right for the sound. Erie Band does a lot of concerts in nursing homes, maybe not for large crowds there, but certainly for appreciative ones. They sometimes have a guest conductor.
That's Michael Poff.
Michael Poff?
Yes.
Okay.
He's in my Joyful Songstress choir.
Is he really?
Yeah.
Well, then this might be a more recent picture than I thought. I think our director approves, so that's all right. John Gardner on clarinet, and I think he's got good technique there. What do you think?
Yes.
I think he's been taught well. But whenever you're in front of a band, especially when you're leading it, you've kind of got a smile on your face.
Yay!
Another nursing home. This is out along the Forks. Tipton House. Devin Henderson works at the library. Brendan Riggle also does a lot of vocals for us when that's called for. Bill Ritchie. This is Tom Ringo on French horn. Nancy Henry, our first clarinet. Lucas Kaler, one of my students at Huntington North, very fine clarinet player. He's in the medical field now. Looks like Sue Nudebaker.
That's Mary Ellen, and she's next to Lucas.
Right, Mary Ellen, right there, yeah. Is Mary Ellen here tonight? I saw Mary. Okay. Is that Joe there? Who's that person there? She looks familiar. Thank you. That's a fun place to play also. But again, nursing homes, COVID kind of changed that, made us adjust that, but it's a fun, very rewarding place to play. For the last few years here, Thane has made our home at College Park. They have a nice family life center, and a lot of our concerts are there, our practices are there, rehearsals are there. There's Deb Baker again. The name escapes me, Stephanie, I think it is. Ralph Gordon, Margaret Hall, Susan Whitaker, we'll skip over him, Terry Penn, Nancy, Brandon Wiggle, Jerry Jurat, and Matt Lamar. And the distinguished friend North is back to us, it's State Campbell. It's a nice place to play. A new tradition, July 4th, the Erie Band, of course, we haven't had credit ball for a while now, the ceremonies there, but the Force of the Wabash does a very nice, very good program, very respectful program, excellent speakers every year, and the band plays for that every year. And you see our new banner there since 1915, and it's a great way to celebrate the 4th of July. In 2015, the band turned 100 years old. And this isn't the picture I wanted to show, but I did want the band members that are here tonight. I did get that picture. Unfortunately, we couldn't get it on the slide presentation tonight, but this was at Huntington North in July 2015. 100 years. I don't care who you are, that's a long time. And it was a very good ceremony, a very good program. Bill Ritchie spoke, Tom McElhenney, myself, Bill also spoke. And one thing I think there's a lot of, oh, I got to tell you 2 stories about that. For the event, we used Elmer Ron's baton for that. They got to use Elmer Ron's baton for that. It was like having there. It was. And with the back then, the baton, that's not the one that I'm using here, but back then we found out they used big, long batons. I don't know, if you were in the front row, you had to be worried. But one of the things that, and of the many things that Bill Ritchie worked hard at to make this a great event, one of them was to play this again, the Erie Lines West, composed by James Lawrence Whitaker, our first director, published by the Erie Railroad, 1917. But it had gotten lost through Elmer's passing and the family donating it for safekeeping. But, as luck would have it, Bill came across this particular piece of music right here, this particular part. And what's key about it is that the solo B-flat cornet, which means that this is the melody. It's got the key, the melody, and so any other part this wouldn't have worked. But we had the solo cornet. And Bill and I were talking, Bill said, wouldn't it be nice if we just had the other parts too? Now we ended up thinking, I thought, you know, my wife, Diane, and there was somebody know her, she is a very talented composer, published nationally, actually internationally. She's had music, we found out this past winter, published in New Zealand, Europe. Let's let her take a look at it. Marching music, Susan type marches, Carl King type marches are very formulaic. They're made by formula. Maybe she could do something with this. Well, the result was that she could, and she basically reconstituted the whole march. We got to play Erie Lines West that evening for the first time in a long time because she had gone through painstakingly. And as historians in this room, she said something to me once about that project that really stood out. You have a composer in 1916 writing this piece of music. You have another composer in 2015 reconstituting it. She said it felt like there was a connection. I was working with him. She saw what he was trying to do musically, melodically, and it helped her reconstitute. She said, oh, I see where he's going here. She says, he wasn't in the room there with me, but it kind of felt like he was. And I thought, what an interesting perspective, especially from a historical point of view. And I want to point that out in a room full of historians. Don't we have a cool trailer? Terry Penn drives us down. We go a lot of places, play a lot of parks, outside places, nursing homes sometimes. And Terry Penn, when we got this, and Terry, one of our clarinet players, made a really, very well-organized trailer. We can get, you wouldn't believe all the chairs and stands we can get in there. You can't tell by this picture, but if you look at the end of it, it's really well designed. And if you see this anywhere, the Erie Band's not far behind. There are, by my count, I hope I didn't miss anybody. There are 9 members of the current band who played in the band for El Moron. And 2 of them are right here. On the left, you've seen her before. Deb Bickle, I think, joined in 1975. She's been a flute player. She's our county's foremost flutist, not just as a player, but as a teacher. Next to her is Karen Wall, and she joined, I think, in 1969. Faye Campbell, by the way, these pictures are public domain, or I have permission to use them. Faye Campbell, I was in 1967, 68. Did you join about that time? Okay. Now, we're showing this picture again because I could not find one of Karen Wall, but Karen Hendrick is playing clarinet. Where is it? Right there. Right there. Nancy, I'm sorry. Karen's her sister. Their sisters. Nancy still plays clarinet in the band. She played again just last night. And this would be season 56, 57 for her. Nancy, can you say about that? This is Bruce Lamar. He's also sitting right back here. You've seen him before. Bruce, I want to say 63, 64?
63, I think.
63.
I think Eddie and I started about the same time.
Okay. Well, I'm getting ahead. Bruce is also an officer of the band now. He handles our funds and treasury. That is no small job. That is no small job. Now, this picture is also second concerts before concert. It may seem pretty informal, but this is Doug Kloss right here. He started joining the band in 1962. And yeah, you see some others there. Oh, I could have used that for Ed. Well, I got a better one for Ed.
I think that's what the blue hat.
Ed, you remember this picture, don't you? I like this because Ed's right here in the middle. He's kind of the main focal point, but this is his father, Richard, and his grandfather, Elmer. Ed, you played in since 62, you think maybe 63? Something like that. What's interesting about that, if you add up the years, Ed's played in as long, or maybe even a year or two longer, than his grandfather, Elmer. And that's saying something. Because Elmer was in from 1915 until his death in 1976. Something that I think is also appropriate, and it's important to know, 108 summers of the Erie band, a member of the Ron family has been in the band every summer, every one of those summers. Elmer's brother-in-law was a trombonist in the first band, one of the original members. And Dick played saxophone. When I first joined the band in '74, they put me on second saxophone with Dick. And again, I was this high school kid, I better keep up here. I don't remember very much he said to him, but he did say one thing. We had a long rest, and he said, "What's the count?" And yes, he didn't know. We made it all right, but that was the last time I didn't count. And I got the, kind of like John Philip Sousa, those first guys who play the first 8 measures. That was my moment. I better pay attention. I better be doing it well. And this is a picture of, I mentioned this gentleman right here, Tom McElhaney is our most senior member. He joined the band in 1957. And you can see by this picture, what is it, 65 years later, he's still a pretty good player. If you haven't had a chance to hear club saxophone, you'll hear Tom, and I can tell you firsthand, he plays very well. And I think each one of those, I hope I didn't miss anybody, but each of those, there are 9 of us that played for El Moron prior to his passing in 1976, but in 1975. Where the band is now is in a different place than it was when I was the director 30 years ago. I think I recognize our society has changed. 30 years ago, and probably all the way before that, if someone in Huntington County needs some music, call the Erie band. And I can expect to call Bill Elron before me. Well, now, there are many more avenues of music. When the Erie band first started, you had to be, there was no recorded music. and it was live. Now we have recorded music, we have other musical avenues. If you need music, you're probably just as likely maybe to call a garage band or contact a garage band to play as the Erie band. So there's more avenues. And community bands are adjusting to that in several different ways. For one, they're taking, again, we go back to the military model. The military bands have their full ensemble, then they have smaller ensembles within them that entertain. And that's what a lot of community bands are doing in Indiana. Auburn, for example, we have a close association with, they have a jazz band that plays during part of the year. Lafayette Citizens Band, I mentioned that not just because of UGIB, but because there's a lot of similarities between our band and theirs. They have about everything. They have a jazz band, they have a saxophone choir, they have woodwind ensemble, brass quintet, percussion ensemble, flute choir. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. And that's a coordinated effort. Bloomington's community band has a German band. The German culture very big down in southern Indiana, in Monroe County, and part of their ensemble is a German band. So, and the Erie band has followed the same kind of pattern. The first group to form was club saxophone. In 2015, you see Ralph Gordon right here. He was who put this together for us. We have, at one point we had members in the group from that were in their 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, and 30s. And our youngest member turned 30, so before she turned 30, we could almost say that. But so you can see it's a very eclectic group. Saxophone is an instrument that you can do a lot of different styles with. During COVID, we did a lot of services in churches. We also do a lot of concerts in parks. We also have a set that uses rhythm section, so we can, if you want a rhythm section with us, you can do that. But it's a very versatile group, very versatile ensemble. The following year, 2016, Thane Campbell, our director, got one of those calls from the Heritage Days Committee, and it was the first year they were doing. They've done this now several times. Now, this year was Huntington College or the university, but they did like decades. They had like the 70s, and everybody dressed up with disco stuff. And this is the first year they did it. They wanted a USO show, and they called Thane up and said, "Hey, can the Erie band provide us a swing band?" And Thane said, as he should, yes. And then he called me up and he says, he told me what he says, we don't really have one of those, do we? No, but we both agreed that we could put one together pretty easily. And this is actually a picture of it right here, the jazz band in the Hotel La Fontaine. And everybody agreed they had such a good time that we just kept it together. Today, now this summer, that kind of takes a different form. It's more of a jazz combo. And I think we have a rhythm section, 2 trombones, 3 saxes, and then we can add to it if we do have a need for a big band. And some people you recognize in here, Drew McElhaney, Reggie Parker, Barry Jameson, John Austin Horn, Devin Henderson, Brandon Riggle, who is it? Chelsea Dawson. Yeah, well, I'm not sure anymore, is it? But yeah, but that's a great place to play. And then just the last couple of years, the Lime City Brass performed. This is a picture of them performing at Christmas time. And there's a brass ensemble that plays in our community also. So those are, that's kind of how the band is looking now. Where is it going in the future? It's really hard to say. I think that it's always going to have a purpose in the fact that it's part of our musical system. We have students that begin in the middle school, they go to the high school, and then what do they do after that? Now, as we know, many of our graduates go to college and they don't move back. But what about the ones that do? They have these skills that we've taught them and a skill they enjoy. The Erie band is the outlet for them. It also provides us with a more diverse musical landscape. People enjoy the music. So I think whatever form it takes, we'll still have that as its goal. I think it also is important that we remember that the Erie band carries with it our national heritage. The railroad is a very important transportation system. The railroad really built the city of Huntington. And these are things that will continue, and I think it's it's also important that we remember that the Erie Band, that Huntington has some unique pieces of its heritage. The Erie Band, the history that we have, and there are things that are unique about our community. Second Garden, so there's a lot of things you can say. I think there's no better way to say it than, or write it than Mike Perkins, who's another member of this organization. In late 1980s, he wrote this about the Erie Band, and I think says it really well. The Erie Band is an anomaly, a delightful relic from a simpler age, and one of the last vestiges of one of America's great transportation lines. The organization that started as Mackerel's band has played to the delight of tens of thousands. The music they make is timeless, appealing to all ages. The musicians are people that we know, revealing a facet of themselves that we don't often see. The Erie Band is a bona fide Huntington tradition. It is a reminder of the glorious area of the city's history. The band plays on because the music is good, the players enjoy themselves, and the audience appreciates the show. And thank you, Mike. I think that says it very well. Kevin, if we turn the lights up, I appreciate everybody listening. I hope you enjoyed the slide presentation. Thank you very much. I want to leave time for you to ask the questions, so maybe some things that I didn't.
If you've got a question, raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone over to you. Anybody have any questions for Chris? Covered it pretty thorough, Chris. I appreciate that. Thank you.
The Erie Band is we didn't talk much about families, but there are two families that have had 4 generations playing Erie Band. The McElhaney family, and appropriately the Rowan family. Elmer's son, grandson, and great-granddaughter all played in the Erie Band. And I think, I'm a second generation member. I think it's part of the family. That's part of the family.
The Erie Band played last Saturday for the Constitution Day event up at the college that we had, and the presenters, we had Eleanor Roosevelt, Edith Roosevelt, and Theodore Roosevelt on stage, professional performers from as far away as Portland, Oregon. They were quite taken that we had such a fine community musical group to introduce their show for them. So you need to know that people were aware of how good you guys are. So
that's good to know. I think there have been, what's I think important about this presentation is the individuals mentioned, and even those kind of peripheral. Delmer Wiesner, for example. There's a whole row of people over here, a whole cabinet level of very important and accomplished people in our community. But very few musicians are remembered. And Delmer's one that won a national championship, brought it right here to Huntington. And there's a lot of great stories among musicians in Huntington County.
well, thank you.
What's that? Our last performance of the summer was last night, but we still have, I think the Leipzig Brass will take a little hiatus. Saxophones will be performing until Christmas. What is it? Veterans Day, that's right. Veterans Day, November 11th, we will be playing there. I stand corrected. That's why it's nice to have a bunch of Erie Band members.
Great.
5th or 6th?
Saturday, first Saturday.
Is it the first Saturday? Okay, it's a Saturday before Veterans Day, first Saturday in November. So yeah, we hope to see you there. That's usually done in Sunken Gardens or near Memorial Park.
Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. We hope to continue to see you in the future as programs come our way. And we've had some wonderful programs here in Huntington. And we hope that this just adds to them, which it will, because we're recording it for posterity. And maybe a free show a couple of years from now where we need a new program. So thank you very much. There are cookies and bottles of water over here. Hope you have a good evening.